Welcome to day 2 of our So You Want to Write a Book workshop. You know, Shakespeare said, be wealthy in your friends. And boy, are we wealthy in our friends. Thanks to all of you who have decided to commit a half an hour every day to get your ideas and your stories in your book out of your head and into the world. So a quick preview of our format, and then we're going to jump right in. Once again, hope you have paper in front of you so that you can ink it when you think it and apply these ideas. So, number 1, we're going to be talking about our topic of the day. Then we go into our quote of the day. Then we go into our success story of the day. Then we talk about the actionable tips that you can put into practice. We'll have a question of the day, and then we'll have a preview of next day. So, let's jump in with the topic of the day. And it is how to use a crowdsourced quiz to gather real-world content so that your book is fresh, so that it's original, and so it's relatable. And by the way, you can do this even if you're writing fiction. The goal is not just to have one voice or one point of view. The goal is to have this book cause people to say, that's exactly how I feel. That just happened to me yesterday. I've always wanted to know how to deal with that. It's like I'm in love with this character. And when we talk with a variety of people and get their insights and their perspectives and their language, we dramatically increase the likelihood of that happening. So that's our topic of today, how to use a crowdsourced quiz. What's our quote for today? Comes from Calvin Coolidge. I know I'm dating myself here. Calvin Coolidge said, I not only use all the brains I have, I use all the brains I can borrow. And that's what we're talking about, is how can we write a book, once again, that has breadth and depth by having a variety of voices instead of just our own. Now, by the way, even if you're writing a memoir, even if you're writing just your story, it still helps to talk with other people because they may have experiences that wouldn't have occurred to us that we can include in our story. So once again, there is a breadth and a depth to our work. All right, let's talk about our success story. Guess what? The success story is me. I get to tell you the backstory of why I'm a woman on a mission about using a crowdsourced quiz. When Tung Fu came out 25 years ago, I will always remember a gentleman came up to me and he said, oh, I loved your book. He said, you must have read all of Tony Robbins' books because your content is so similar. Well, I was kind of shocked and offended and kind of sad because I had not read Tony Robbins' book. He endorsed Tung Fu. I'd never read his book, and I didn't want people thinking that I was cribbing other people's material, that I was reading other people's books and just doing a book report, a cut and paste of taking something from there and taking something from there, cobbling it together and then calling it my work. So that's when I decided that I was not going to read my peers' work. If you're writing about leadership, please do not read or research all the leadership books out there. If you're writing about love or stress or parenting, I know the common advice is to do your research and read everything out there on their topic. I don't recommend that. And the reason is because we wake up at 3 a.m. and we've got a great idea. It's not our idea. It's Brene Brown's idea, or it's Stephen Covey's idea, or it is some other famous author, and we read their work and we now are spouting what other people have said before. I really believe we have an obligation to be original, to be fresh, to share things that people haven't heard before. And if you're thinking, Sam, there's nothing new under the sun, sure there is. And we're going to show you how to do that instead of just sharing platitudes or cliches that seem obvious. So now why this crowdsourced quiz worked so well for me is I decided every time I would write a book, I would have this 10-question quiz, and I'm going to be giving you that quiz right in our time together. Here's what happened one time I didn't use the quiz. I was working on Tung Fu at school, and I had writer's block. Now, I love to write, and yet I was on deadline, I was hopping on planes, busy speaking, and the words wouldn't come, and writing had become a bit of a grind. Now, I was very fortunate because I read an article in USA Today about a Hollywood director and producer and screenwriter who was at the top of his game. You may know who I'm talking about. This is the individual, was the first to have an Emmy for Best Drama and an Emmy for Best Comedy, all in the same year. This was David Kelly, who produced and wrote and directed Ally McBeal, the comedy, and The Practice. Well, what happened, though, is that all of a sudden the Golden Boy had lost the golden touch. And the reporter said, well, of course he's lost the common touch. He's married to Michelle Pfeiffer. He lives in a $15 million house. And all he does is he writes at home, drives to the studio, directs, returns home, writes all day, drives to the studio, and directs. He's lost the common touch, which is why people were finding his plots kind of increasingly bizarre or not relatable, is because he'd become isolated and insular. The light bulb went off on my head. I lived a half a mile from my son's high school. I'm writing Tung Fu at school. I was trying to think up what to say. Writing had become an intellectual exercise. Well, I got up out of my chair. I went over to the high school and I interviewed the principal and said, what do you do when your teachers are coming to you saying, I quit, I'm not getting paid enough to deal with this? What do you do when parents say, this teacher is playing favorites? What do you do, kids, when you're being bullied on the bus or bullied on the playground? And I interviewed my target readers. I interviewed people who were my intended audience, and I asked them the questions about what they were dealing with and what they would want to know. I went home, and the words were flowing out of my brain so fast my fingers could hardly keep up. And it was because using that crowdsourced quiz, talking with our intended readers and asking them the questions you're about to get about what is timely and relevant for them, what don't they know how to do, what would they love to figure out how to do, where do they feel alone? And it would be comforting to know there are other people who are dealing with that same thing, who have actually persevered through it and gotten on the other side of it. So the success story is, I believe once you write out these 10 questions, and you can do this virtually, you start talking with your intended readers and asking them these questions, you too will rush back to your laptop, because now you have all these real world stories. Now you have language that you wouldn't use, however you realize other people would relate to it. Now you find that it's not a one-note book, that this book comes alive because you are using content with permission from people who are dealing with this issue, who have dealt with this issue, and your book will become infinitely richer for it. So here's the tips. Now write them down, because we've got 10 questions. We're going to cover it in about 10-15 minutes. Here we go. Question number 1 on your crowdsourced quiz. These are 10 W questions. Question number 1. So what do you mean by this topic? If you're interviewing someone, let's give an example. Let's talk about Michelle Ray, who is a client who wrote a book on Lead Yourself First. So see, what we want is to ask someone the very first question. So what does it mean to you to lead yourself first? Because people are going to come back with different responses. Maybe they're going to say, well, I think that leading yourself means that you don't procrastinate, you don't put things off, you take charge. Maybe someone else would say, I think leading yourself first means like being like Anita Borg, who said it's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is for permission. I think leading yourself means that instead of waiting for other people to give you what you want, need, and deserve, you take responsibility for initiating on your own behalf. So see, you ask people, when you say this term, what it is you're writing about, the theme or the topic of your book, how would they define it? All right, question number 2 is a who question. So who role modeled this for you? Who is a walking, talking example of this? Or who taught you how to do this? If we're talking about leading yourself first, maybe you think about someone early on who taught you to initiate, not to wait, who taught you that if something was important, that you would make it happen instead of just wishing or hoping it would happen. So who is a role model of this concept, of this idea, who you've known in your life, or who taught you how to do it? All right, let's go down to question number 3. Who is the anti example of this? Who is a walking, talking cautionary tale, someone who did not do this? For example, who is someone who blamed everybody else for their life? They never led themselves first. They always blamed their leaders for not giving them the project they deserved, or for not giving them the promotion that they had promised, or for not giving them the pay raise that they think that they earned. So who is someone who has never led themselves first? They've never taken charge. Maybe you're writing about clutter or organization. You know, who's the role model is maybe Marie Kondo is your role model of someone who absolutely is a walking, talking example of your concept. And maybe the anti-person, the cautionary tale, maybe you grew up in a home where there was constant clutter and you were ashamed to bring your friends over because the house was such a mess. So do you see how when you are interviewing people and asking these questions, they will start giving you their stories. They will start telling you their experiences of this, and you are gathering examples for your work so that you're not just talking about the ideas, the concepts, which can be platitudes or can be cliches. You're talking about everyday people and how they deal with this, and that's what makes a book a page turner, because we keep putting ourselves in the story. All right, so first question, what are we talking about? How do you define it? Number 2, who's a good example of it? Number 3, who was not a good example of it? Number 4 is a when question. When did you do this really well? We're talking about leading yourself first. When is a time you saw a problem and you thought somebody should do something about that? And then you thought, I'm as much as somebody as anybody. I'm going to do something about that. Maybe you're like my friend Karen Wagner. When my sons were growing up in Maui, they used to burn the sugar cane. And when they burned the sugar cane, the plastic that was on the ground to keep the soil from being blown away by the trade winds, that black soot would cover the island. In fact, there were a lot of respiratory problems on Maui because of this black cane soot. Well, one day Karen walked into the elementary school and she drew her finger on the desk and it was covered with this black soot. Well, now there was no money in the budget to pay the custodians or people to come in and do it. So she mobilized a group of parents to come in every day an hour before school and actually clean that black soot. So talk about leading yourself first. Talk about a time she did this. So when is a time maybe in your life you saw an issue or problem, and instead of waiting for other people to do something about it, you took the lead? So how about next question? When is the time you did not take the lead? When is the time something was wrong, something was going on, and you kept waiting for the authorities to do something about it? Or you thought, well, it's not my problem, it's not my fault, and you kept waiting for the people who created it or caused it to take the lead. So when is an example where this did not happen? Once again, let's go back to the clutter. If you're writing about keeping your house clean, making your house beautiful, it's having space, feng shui or something like that. It's when is a time you did that to your home and how did it make you feel and what were the rewards? And then when was the time you didn't? And why? Were you too busy or you were kind of depressed? Things were going on. You just didn't have the energy. You see how asking these questions, you are just going to get an incredible wealth of information for people. And it's not an idea, it's an actual event or experience that once again makes your book come alive. All right, next question is, why is this important? What are the advantages of benefits of leading yourself first or of clearing your home from clutter? Ask people their opinion about why it is worthwhile to do this, why it's important. You can see the next question coming, can't you? Then why don't we do it? If it's so important, if it has benefits, what are the blocks? What are the deterrents? What keeps us from leading ourselves first? Maybe we think we're not getting paid enough, or we don't have time, or maybe we tried that once and it backfired. Now, if it's so important, then why don't we do it? What are the consequences of not taking action? All right, let's go into our next question. Review. Number 1 is what is the definition? Number 2, who is someone who did it well? Number 3, who is someone who did not do it well? Number 4, When is the time you did it well? Number 5, when is the time you didn't do it well? Number 6, why is this important? Number 7, then why don't we do it? Number 8 is, what is your advice? We want to give people an opportunity to be an expert. Imagine if you were you're writing a book about parenting. What is your best piece of advice that you would give young parents with a child? If you're talking about leading yourself first, what's the best thing you've learned about how to do that? If you're talking about cleaning your home, what's your best piece of advice? What would you recommend? What's one tip that makes it easy to do or that gets such great results you're motivated to continue to do it? Question number 9 on your quiz is, what can I cover in my book that would make it timely, relevant, useful, inspiring, insightful for you? So what is something you're dealing with and you would love to be able to read a book that told you how to deal with that issue? Or what would make this book worth reading for you? Maybe that it has stories that start every chapter, or maybe that it has sample dialogue of actually what to say in that situation. So what would make this book useful for you, insightful for you? Maybe you find a lot of nonfiction books are just way too serious, and maybe some real life humor would make this a little bit easier to go down. Maybe what would make this book interesting or useful, inspiring for you is that you have short chapters, that you don't want to plow through 30-page chapters. You want these page turners that Dan Brown did in his book, The Da Vinci Code. And let's come down to question number 10. Who shall I interview about this? I've enjoyed getting your perspectives, your insights. Who is someone who you believe is a walking, talking role model of this, or has a lot of insights on this, or is someone who learned this the hard way and could tell the story of not doing it well, and then the lights went on and the band played and they came around to it? So who is someone I could interview? Now, I promise you that if you write those questions down and you put them on one page, that you can either, if you're in business, you can put that on your website. If you're a professional organizer, I can tell you from experience that putting a quiz in the beginning of your book, putting a quiz on your website, passing it out and giving people who arrive early to your programs an opportunity to answer those questions, it gives them skin in the game. Now, all of a sudden, they're not just waiting for you to stop talking. They are given an opportunity to think about how this applies to their life. Think about, who influenced them about this, to think about what they would suggest or recommend. So now you have an interactive dialogue with your readers instead of a one-way monologue where we're just downloading our story, downloading our tips, downloading our methodology. Writing is supposed to be interactive. We want not just to picture the people who will read it and to imagine the light going on in their eyes. We want to have content that they are amazed at how relevant it is to them, how useful it is, because this happens in their life and they've never known what to say, and now they do. So if you print out this quiz, I suggest you can put it on your website, or you can crowdsource it virtually by putting it out in Facebook and asking people to take 5 minutes and to give you their feedback. And when we can go back out in public again and we can interview people, I interview taxi drivers, I interview waiters. When I go out to lunch or to dinner with friends, I say, I'm working on this book, and may I have 15 minutes of your time to get some of your ideas on what could make this book even more relevant. And often it ends up not just being 15 years, because people love to be asked for their opinion. Malcolm Forbes said, the way to a man's heart is through his opinion. I think the way to almost anyone's heart is through their opinion, is through their experience, is through their advice. And when we have this quiz, once again, instead of sequestering ourselves and just trying to think up a book, what we're doing is we are connecting with our audience. That is what all communication is. It is connecting. It is not an isolated, insular, intellectual exercise where we are just thinking what we want to say. It is always thinking of who we want to connect with. And by collecting these stories and asking these questions, we are dramatically increasing the likelihood that we will connect, and it's because we care. You've heard Maya Angelou's statement. It's if we want people to know we care, we need to care. So how are you going to do that? All right, let's move into our question of the day. One of our questions is that if we're working in Word documents, surely there's something else that's more effective than that. Well, in one of our coming sessions, I'm going to give you all of the online options where you can organize your writing. You can actually integrate your chapters. So if you're working in different files, there's a way for you to put it all together. However, if I had one piece of advice about how to write, it is to go and get otter.ai, OTTER.ai. Now, many people tell me they do not have time to write, or that when they put aside time to write, the words won't come. That's because for many of us, writing is an unfamiliar exercise and we've got other things on our mind. However, you have time to think, and guess what? Otter, OTTER.ai, not only gives you an instant voice recording, it gives you an instant transcript. My clients tell me this is a godsend because if you go out for a walk, you may be thinking about something that just happened in a meeting that you were in, and somebody said something and it was just so profound, and you don't have time to write it down, but on your walk, you have time to put on that Otter. It's free. I'm not on commission. I just know from experience, all of my clients Otter every single one of our calls. They Otter when they go out for a walk. They Otter when they get on a treadmill. They Otter in previous days when they got on a plane. I'll give you an example. Terry Jones, who founded Travelocity and Kayak, is a client. Terry doesn't have time to write. He was, he's running companies and so forth, and yet he has time to think. And furthermore, he's in the flow when he's thinking because he is conversant with this, or he is flush with something that just occurred to him, or something he just heard, or something he just thought. You can pick up Otter and you can just talk it out in real time. Most importantly, it's got your voice. Robert Frost said, "No joy in the writer, no joy in the reader." If writing is hard work, if it's a grind, if we're forcing it, our readers will feel it, and it is not fun. However, you've all had the experience of if you're writing a book on parenting and you get off the phone and somebody said something they just did with one of their kids, long days, short years, and you thought, that's magnificent. Well, pick up the phone. It only takes a minute on Otter to write down that experience, recreate it, reenact it exactly as it happened, what that person said, and then the impact it had on you, and then the tip on maybe how people in the middle of quote unquote being stuck at home with their kids, we can look at our kids and put it in perspective with 4 words: long days, short years. So, are you going to get otter.ai? If so, from now on, when you're thinking about your book and something occurs to you, something, a characteristic of one of your characters, or a scene in your fiction novel, or a piece of dialogue that's very real life, just pick up Otter and talk it out, and then title it where you think it will go in your book. And when you do that, you are collecting this alive language. You are capturing your voice. It's going to sound like you because you said it. So once again, OTTER.ai. And when it comes to writing, we really don't even have to be a writer as long as we can talk, as long as we can talk passionately about something, as long as we can dig down and talk about how we feel about this, about our intent for this, about our excitement for this. That emotion now is being captured as well as the words. And it's there in writing. So now you could clean it up and integrate it into your book. It is a shortcut. I've had many people finish their books. And they didn't have time to write. However, they had time to talk out their book. And when they read it, they sometimes even forgot they said it, but it was perfect because they captured that moment of flow. Once again, I'm not on commission. I just believe that we are fortunate to live in the days of Otter.ai, where we can write a book that has our voice, that has that real time energy in it that comes alive on the page. Now let's give a preview of what we'll be talking about tomorrow. Tomorrow, what we're going to be talking about is best practice from Maui Writers Conference. I'd mentioned in our first day that I had the privilege of being the executive director and the MC of the Maui Writers Conference for 17 years. Kind of what Cannes is to the film industry, we were to the publishing industry. We had the world's best authors, best agents, best editors and publishers, and people who had an opportunity to pitch their projects face to face with these decision makers. Now, over the 17 years, I've collected best practices. And tomorrow, we're going to be talking about rituals and routines that set up flow. I'll give you a quick preview. Do you know one of the most important ones? Draft, then craft. Don't get it perfect. Get it down. Get it written instead of trying to get it right. Because so many of us, if we start writing, we start editing. We start rereading what we've written. And if we reread what we've written, chances are we'll rewrite what we've written. And at the end of the month, we'll have the same 10 pages. And they won't necessarily be better. They'll just be different. When we're writing in the beginning, the way to get the flow, the way to get the pace and the momentum is to draft, then craft. The critical voice kills the creative voice, which is why in the beginning, the goal is to produce paragraphs, to produce paragraphs, to produce paragraphs, is to make progress. Because the way to make progress is to keep writing. It is when we continue to write that the voice comes out to play, because the voice is not getting criticized. The voice is not getting edited. We're not second thinking ourselves, second guessing ourselves, is that we are giving ourselves permission to say what we want to say in the voice we want to say. Now remember, once you've produced pages, then you can come back and look at it. Then you can come back and clean it up. The most important thing first, though, is progress, not perfection. Get it written, then get it right. Draft, then craft. And tomorrow, I'll be sharing best practice tips from Frank McCourt, the Pulitzer Prize winning author of Angela's Ashes. I'll be sharing a best practice tip from Pulitzer Prize winning humorist Dave Barry, and we'll hear all kinds of tips about what they all learned about how we can get our ideas and our stories and our books out of our head and into the world by establishing writing rituals that set up flow. I've enjoyed being here. Hope that you have too, and that you join us tomorrow on day 3. This is Sam Horn. Right on.